This program is rated PG. It contains themes and scenes which may not be suitable for very young audiences. Parental guidance is advised.
We're working to connect a region of over 600 new bridges between our lands.
Hello, I'm Alma Angeles. We're moving to the next stage of the pandemic, and as the world resets to the new normal, we find ourselves seeking the right balance between health and livelihood, constantly adjusting the boundaries between liberty and responsibility. On today's headlines, the Duterte administration is looking forward to working with Japan's new Prime Minister, Yoshihide Suga, to further boost Manila and Tokyo's bilateral cooperation. France, Germany, and the United Kingdom submitted a note verbale to the United Nations, asserting the 2016 Arbitral Award, which opposed China's vast historical claims in the resource-rich South China Sea. And how ASEAN is helping cities through ASEAN Sustainable Urbanization Strategy and ASEAN Cities Network. First, the Duterte administration is looking forward to working with Japan's new Prime Minister, Yoshihide Suga, to further boost Manila and Tokyo's bilateral cooperation, according to Malacanang. Presidential spokesperson Harry Roque said in a virtual press conference, the Duterte administration is ready to work with Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga in further strengthening the strategic bilateral cooperation, building on the special relationship established with former Prime Minister Abe Shinzo. He said the Philippines considers Japan as a close friend, a friend closer than a brother, unquote. Prime Minister Suga is a close confidant of outgoing Japanese Prime Minister Abe. His term in office will continue until Japan's general elections in September 2021. His predecessor, Abe, announced his intention to resign from office due to health reasons on August 28. He is suffering from ulcerative colitis. In a previous statement, President Duterte hailed Japan's contribution to the peace and security in Asia-Pacific under Abe's leadership. In the past few years, he said Tokyo had proactively advanced regional security and the rule of law, especially in the maritime commons in the region. And Sri Lanka has filed negligence and pollution charges against the Greek shipper of an oil tanker that leaked fuel off the island nation's coast after a week-long fire. Joining us live from Sri Lanka is Vanessa Viloria Silva. Vanessa.
Hi, Alma. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Vanessa. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes, Alma. Laboratory tests proved there was an oil leak into the ocean. The Government Analysis Department report confirmed that the oil which leaked to the ocean was the fuel used by the crude oil tanker to operate its vessel. The Attorney General has submitted an interim claims of 340 million rupees to the lawyers representing the owners of the MT New Diamond oil tanker for the cost incurred by the Sri Lankan government in the assistance rendered to the ship and other related matter. This estimation of costs was prepared only for the cost incurred up until September 15. The AG's coordinating officer State Counsel, Nishara Jayaratne, stated that 340 million rupees claim was presented on September 16 in writing seeking compensation for the costs related to the assistance rendered by all parties, including the Sri Lanka Navy, Sri Lanka Air Force, Sri Lanka Port Authority, Colombo Dockyard PLC, Marine Environment Protection Authority, and Department of Coast Conservation to extinguish the fire environment as a result of oil leakage related to the incident will be submitted within the next couple of days. After the relevant reports are received from the Marine Environment Protection Authority, the compensations is expected to sought for the total amount of the cost incurred by all parties based on a complete estimate, and that this estimate cannot be submitted until the oil tanker exits Sri Lanka waters. Back to you, Alma.
All right. Thank you very much, Vanessa, for your updates there on the Empty Diamond ship. Yes. Looking forward to more developments on this developing story. Thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you so much, Alma. Reporting live from Sri Lanka, this is Vanessa Viloria Silva, and we live in interesting times.
In Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh's underground metro terminal is nearly finished. Plus, Vietnam orders an evacuation for its 1.1 million people as a storm nears the country. Chriselle Lacuna joins us live from Vietnam. Chriselle.
Hello, Alma. That is correct. Saigon's downtown metro terminal nearly finished. An underground metro terminal located in front of the municipal theater in downtown Ho Chi Minh City is nearly finished as workers are completing the very last phases of construction. Nearly 60 engineers and construction workers work every night to concrete the railway section inside the terminal, which is named for the municipal theater. Metro Route number 1, which runs from the Ben Thanh in District 1 to Sutin Theme Park in District 9, is 19.7 kilometers long, including 2.6 underground railways and 17.1 kilometers elevated railways. The project includes 3 underground stations and 11 stations above the ground. The construction started in August 2012, and about 76% of the work has been finished so far, according to the Management Authority for Urban Railways. The said terminal is being finalized and will be available for the public observation for the first ever time since its building started 6 years ago. The city's Management Authority for Urban Railways hopes that opening of the terminal to public visits will help to inform residents of the progress made on one of the key projects in Ho Chi Minh City. Another update, Alma, Vietnam prepares citizens in face of the tropical storm Nul. Central provinces to be hit by Storm Nul banned vessels from going out to sea on Thursday as the tropical storm is forecasted to make landfall on Friday morning. The Prime Minister asked ministries, agencies, and localities to keep a close eye on the development of the storm and prepare to be hit. But we received an update just this afternoon, Alma, that Vietnam's weather agency said on Friday that tropical storm Nul was weakening as it approached land, but it could still bring heavy rain and cause floods and landslides in central areas of the country. The government said on Wednesday that it was readying plans to evacuate up to 1 million people from central coastal areas of the storm was forecasted to make landfall with wind speeds up to 135 kilometers an hour. And for the COVID update, Vietnam reported no community transmission of COVID-19 on Friday morning and the 15th day in a row. According to the Ministry of Health, the national tally has hit 1,066 with 940 recoveries and with 35 deaths. Those are the updates from Vietnam, Alma.
Thank you, Chriselle, for your updates there in Vietnam. And you take care and let us know of the updates during the storm, this upcoming storm. Please take care, and we'll wait for more updates there in Vietnam. Thank you.
Absolutely, Alma. Thank you very much. Reporting live from Ho Chi Minh City, I am Chriselle Lacuna. We live in interesting times.
Now, the Solomon Islands said it will repatriate hundreds of students stranded in the Philippines, despite fears their return will torpedo the Pacific nation's rare coronavirus-free status. Now, more than 400 students have been stuck, with many complaining of difficult conditions since the island nation closed its borders in March. Their return has become a headache for officials in one of the few COVID-free countries in the world. Prime Minister Manasseh Sogavare said all students, including 12 who have tested positive for the virus, would be repatriated and that officials were working with the Red Cross. Flights from Manila to Honiara are planned on September 27 and the 29th. A third on October 24 will carry students who tested positive after they recover and undergo quarantine. Students in Manila blame the positive tests on the government's failure to bring them home. Prime Minister Sogavare said delays were caused by lockdowns in the Philippines and the paperwork, including missing passports and expired visas. Philippine Red Cross Chairman and CEO Richard Gordon said his organization was providing welfare services to the 12 students who tested positive. Gordon said these include psychosocial support to the students and their dependents, provision of quarantine kits composed of masks, vitamins, and disinfecting supplies and materials, and provision of food packs. All students will need to test negative for the virus at least 3 times before they are allowed to travel to the Solomons. As community quarantine measures are still implemented in the country for 6 months, Trade Secretary Ramon Lopez favors granular lockdowns than large-scale restrictions. Mr. Lopez spoke at a conference of advocacy group Flatten the Fear Philippines on Thursday. Now, the group is composed of concerned doctors and citizens helping the country to flatten the fear against coronavirus disease by presenting clear, actionable plans promoting measures to prevent the spread of the virus and early treatment protocol. Mr. Lopez said that instead of putting a city on lockdown, restrictions in smaller areas like a barangay or a building should be implemented. The area should be immediately isolated and disinfected before reopening. He said instead of heavy lockdown, we can have the granular lockdown, unquote. Lopez also said the economy has suffered so much due to heavy lockdowns that were implemented at the onset of the outbreak in the country. In the second quarter of the year, gross domestic product declined by 16.5%. In April, the unemployment rate dropped to 17.7% before easing to a negative growth of 10% in July. Joint Task Force COVID Shield Commander, Lieutenant General Guillermo Eleazar, clarified that the travel guidelines to Tagaytay City after the popular destination opened its doors to tourists. Eleazar explained that a travel authority is required for individuals headed for Tagaytay, especially those coming from areas under GCQ like the National Capital Region or vice versa, especially those who want to spend their vacation in the city. Take a look.
87.7%. Go ahead.
Pinaklaro natin na base po dun sa prevailing protocol na ibinigay ng National Task Force, the remaining travel restriction that we have is that pag magkocross tayo ng mga boundary ng mga probinsya, unless ikaw ay apor at work-related lakad mo, ay dapat ay may travel authority. Pero kung tayo po ay nasa NGCQ na, binibigyan na po, pinaubayan na sa local government unit kung hahayaan nyo po na bukas na rin kayo dun sa karating lugar nyo. Provided na ikaw ay NGCQ at yung katabi mo o panggagalingan nitong mga magta-travel ay nasa NGCQ pa rin. So alam niyo po, itong travel authority, yun po yung naging basihan ng ating mga LGUs para may control tayo pagpasok nila. Dahil pag nag-a-apply po tayo ng travel authority, hindi lamang ang kailangan ay medical clearance certificate, kung hindi, yung coordination na napakahalaga from the sending LGU to the receiving LGU. Na pag yan po ay pinagbigay alam sa kanila, they have the control whether they will allow them outright or pwedeng ma-delay yung pagpasok doon. Subalit, kagaya nga po sa sitwasyon natin dito po sa Cavite, dahil po siya ay MGCQ na, pwede niya na pong ibukas ang kanyang border sa iba as long as ang katabi niya dapat ay nasa MGCQ pa rin. Meaning, in the case po ng Cavite, na sinasabi nga natin na within the province, hindi naman po kailangan ng travel authority. Pero dahil ang katabi niya ay Metro Manila at saka pati po yung Batangas at nasa GCQ pa rin yun, ay kailangan pa rin po ng travel authority kung dadaan sila or magagaling sa Metro Manila or doon po sa Batangas. Ngayon, kung galing man po na Laguna, since pareho silang MGCQ, pwede na po wala na pong travel authority at yan po ay desisyon ng local government executive. So balit para po sa ibang mga probinsya kung na nasa MGCQ, kung gusto nyo pa rin po na kayo ay may travel authority ang mga papasok sa inyo, which I believe ay yun po yung pinapractice dahil naandun ang control natin. Dahil kung tatanggalin natin ang travel authority, talaga pong you can expect that napakarami na pupunta sa inyong mga border at papasok sa inyo. So malinaw po yung sinasabi natin ngayon na in the case of Cavite dahil nga sa Tagaytay, pwede pong pumasok doon dahil MGCQ, pero kung ang paggagalingan ay Metro Manila, boundary ng Metro Manila in Batangas, kailangan pa rin ng travel authority dahil nasa GCQ ang Metro Manila.
Okay. Nawala ang audio. General, nawala ang audio, but thank you very much. To summarize, MGCQ to MGCQ travel, hindi kinakailangan ng travel pass, but the local government unit may still impose it. GCQ to MGCQ, kinakailangan ng travel pass. Mga taga Metro Manila na nais pumunta ng Tagaytay, kinakailangan nyo pong kumuha ng travel pass. At bago kayo mabigyan ng travel pass ng PNP, kinakailangan magpresenta po kayo ng medical certificate.
We need an affordable COVID vaccine for everybody, everywhere, because we will only be safe if everybody's safe. That is the message from UN Secretary General Antonio Gutierrez, who's been speaking to UN News ahead of the upcoming General Assembly, which heads of state will likely attend virtually. Now, outlining his priorities, Mr. Gutierrez warned that solidarity is essential if we are all to overcome and move on from the tragic impact of the pandemic. Let's listen in.
The COVID-19 pandemic is a crisis unlike any in our lifetime, and so this year's General Assembly session will be unlike any other too. We have a full program, and the stakes could not be higher. Our world is nearing the grimmest of milestones, 1 million lives lost to the virus. Meanwhile, the outbreak remains out of control. The virus is the #1 global security threat in our world today, and that is why in March I called for a global ceasefire. My appeal resonated with member states, civil society, and a number of armed groups across the world. And today, from Afghanistan to Sudan, we see hopeful new steps towards peace. In Syria, Libya, Ukraine, and elsewhere, ceasefires or standstills in the fighting can create space for diplomacy. In Yemen, we are pressing for a ceasefire, confidence-building measures, and the resumption of the political process. Many pin their hopes on a vaccine. But let's be clear, there is no panacea in a pandemic. A vaccine alone cannot solve this crisis, certainly not in the near term. We need to massively expand new and existing tools that can respond to new cases and provide vital treatment to suppress transmission and save lives, especially over the next 12 months. But starting now, a vaccine must be seen as a global public good because COVID-19 respects no borders. We need a vaccine to be affordable and available to all, a people's vaccine. Mistrust in vaccines is on the rise around the world. We have seen alarming reports of large segments of the population in some countries indicating their reluctance or even refusal to take a future COVID-19 vaccine. In the face of this lethal disease, we must do our utmost to halt deadly misinformation.
Asean in Focus, we'll be right back.
The New Era University, in its 45th year of excellence, discipline, and service to humanity, will offer online education all levels beginning this first semester academic year 2020 to 2021 through the NEU Virtual Learning Environment, or NEU VLE. New Era University offers a complete basic education cycle from kindergarten up to senior high school, offering all strands. NEU has 18 colleges, and 2 graduate schools. It also offers ALS and ETF. Best of all, NEU has the most affordable tuition fees among private universities in the Philippines. NEU is at Quezon City, the city of San Fernando, Pampanga, General Santos City, South Cotabato, Lipa City, Batangas, and Pinugay, Baras, Rizal.
New Era University is under the stewardship of Dr. Dilo L. Rosas.
What are you waiting for? Be part of the new normal. Enroll now. Classes start on October 5, 2020.
The Philippine government, as the country coordinator for the ASEAN-China dialogue, is pushing for the early conclusion of negotiations on the Code of Conduct in the South China Sea. During the 27th ASEAN Regional Forum, held last September 12, Foreign Affairs Secretary Teodoro Locsin Jr. said Manila will push as hard as it can for the conclusion of an effective and substantive Code of Conduct in the South China Sea. The Philippines hopes to make substantial headway on the second reading of the negotiating draft before turning over the co-chairmanship of the negotiations to Myanmar next year. Coordinatorship to my brother Myanmar, that is what I am honored and bound to do, Locsin said in a separate tweet on Tuesday. Locsin, during the forum, also expressed gratitude for the expressions of support for the Philippines in the wake of the recent Holo bombings, as he called for continuous cooperation to combat terrorism. The ARF is an inclusive platform in the Asia-Pacific region for fostering constructive dialogue and cooperation among participants on political and security issues of common interest and concerns such as combating terrorism and transnational crimes. It's currently comprised of 27 members, namely the 10 ASEAN member states, Australia, Canada, China, the European Union, India, Japan, New Zealand, the Republic of Korea, Russia, the United States, Bangladesh, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, Mongolia, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Timor-Leste, and one ASEAN observer, Papua New Guinea. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations, meanwhile, is comprised of Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. Meanwhile, China called for an early conclusion of talks on the Code of Conduct with ASEAN to avert clashes in the South China Sea. Take a look.
When it comes to the South China Sea, our collective aspiration to agree on a mutually beneficial, effective, and substantive COC that would contribute to regional peace, security, and stability is in accordance with international law, including the 1982 UNCLOS.
We are seeking to finalize the COC on the basis of consensus building as early as possible to create a set of rules that reflect the region's characteristics and suit its reality and needs to effectively uphold the peace and stability of the South China Sea and this region.
As tensions simmer, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi told an online meeting of foreign ministers from Southeast Asian countries that the United States is becoming the biggest driver of militarization of the South China Sea. Wang said that China's greatest interest in the waters was peace and security, while accusing the U.S. of creating tension and seeking profit from it. France, Germany, and the United Kingdom submitted a note verbal to the United Nations asserting the 2016 Arbitral Award, which opposed China's vast historical claims in the resource-rich South China Sea. The diplomatic notes dated September 16 came following the numerous communications issued by China in response to Malaysia's submission to the Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf. The three European powers collectively said the claims with regard to the exercise of historic rights over the South China Sea waters don't comply with international law and the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS, provisions, and none less than the 2016 landmark decision of the Permanent Court of Arbitration confirms this point. In their note verbal, the three nations also called on all claimants to resolve disputes peacefully and in accordance with the principles and rules of UNCLOS. The South China Sea, where the Spratly Islands are located, is contested by the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, Taiwan, and China, which claims almost 80% of the waters under its so-called 9-dash line. The arbitration case, initiated and won by the Philippines in 2016, ruled that these sweeping claims by the Asian power are illegal, a ruling Beijing continues to reject until now. To Indonesia now, where 3 ethnic Rohingya people have died after their 7-month ordeal at sea. The UN Refugee Agency said in an alert, the UN agency said that it was saddened by the deaths of the 3 refugees who reached northern Aceh last week, and they are described as a young man and 2 young women, all under the age of 25. UNHCR said that it is also deeply concerned about the health of many others in the group of nearly 300 people who left Cox's Bazar settlement in Bangladesh in February and spent months floating in the Andaman Sea. More than 30 people are believed to have died on that journey, and the UN has warned that more than a third of those who reach Indonesia require hospitalization, having been repeatedly turned away and refused disembarkation in the region. 4 out of 5 are women and children, and around half are girls under the age of 18, UNHCR said, noting that the survivors had suffered serious trauma. Many children in the group are also without their parents, and at least one 12-year-old boy was left without a caregiver during the journey when his father died. In a statement, UNHCR commended the government of Indonesia and the local community in Aceh for their assistance. Jailed 7 years for publishing satire of a fictitious royal family, activist Somyot Pruksak-Semsuk is in awe today as university students spearhead a growing movement demanding reforms to Thailand's ultra-powerful monarchy. Take a look.
When I was released, I released from the prison. That is very small place of the prison. I came out to this society but still have no freedom. It's considered it's a big prison. That means I came from the small prison into the big person in the society. I am very happy and very proud that our effort in the past, many people die on the streets, die in the university more than 40 years ago. Suddenly, this is not finished. It continues, and the new generation, they discover the reality that there is no hope for them under this system. And they come up openly to speak about the reform of the monarchy. So we hope the new generation, they are more experienced and more concerned what will be happen if they go on the struggle or come on the street to fight against dictatorship. The main problem is they can find out my pictures or my story from the Google or mass media that publicize my case and find out that I still be considered the dangerous person in society. So very difficult to get the job.
Young activists have staged near daily protests for the past 2 months, calling for frank discussions of the unassailable royal family's role, once a taboo topic because of Thailand's draconian royal defamation laws. Among the students' demands is the abolition of the so-called 112 law, which shields the royal family from defamation but has been broadly interpreted to target any criticism. It carries a maximum sentence of 15 years per charge. They're also calling for the resignation of Premier Prayut Chan-o-cha, a former army chief who masterminded the 2014 coup, and a rewrite to the military scripted constitution they say stacked last year's election in his favor. Just 6 people were behind bars on lese-majeste charges before the 2014 coup, according to legal and aid groups. Somyot was among them, ensnared by the law in 2011 after his now defunct Voice of Taksin magazine published satirical articles about a fictional king. By the end of the junta's 5-year regime, the number of lese-majeste convictions had surged to at least 169, although use of the law has slowed in recent years. Prime Minister Prayut has said this is due to the mercy of the king. Using lese-majeste is not good for the monarchy's image, Somyot said, explaining it implies the institution is confronting the people directly. Coronavirus-ravaged economies across Asia-Pacific will make a swoosh-shaped recovery next year. That is according to the Asian Development Bank forecast. But it also warned that the further restrictions to combat the contagion could derail the region's return to growth. The Philippine-based lender said developing Asia, stretching from the Cook Islands in the Pacific to Kazakhstan in Central Asia, is expected to contract in 2020 for the first time in nearly 6 decades, throwing tens of millions of people into poverty. It also said the 0.7% shrink in gross domestic product compares with the bank's previous estimate in June for 0.1% growth and will mark the first regional GDP contraction since the early 1960s. The downturn is across the board, with almost 3/4 of regional economies projected to contract, the largest such share in the past 6 decades, according to the bank in the latest update to its outlook. While the vast region is expected to bounce back next year, with GDP projected to grow 6.8%, it'll be substantially smaller than forecast before COVID-19 struck. The bank warned that reimposing tough virus restrictions could hamper the recovery and even trigger financial turmoil. And with no end in sight to the coronavirus pandemic, worldwide demand for surgical gloves, as for other types of personal protective equipment, is booming, leaving manufacturers struggling to keep up. Take a look. The global PPE market, from masks, gowns, and gloves to shoes and sanitizing gels, is expected to balloon from $52 billion in 2019 to $93 billion in 2027, according to German market data specialist Statista. U.S.-based Allied Market Research estimates that the global disposable gloves market amounted to $6.8 billion in 2019 and is expected to nearly triple to $18.8 billion by 2027. Just as worldwide shortages of masks and disinfectant gels have pushed up the prices of those products, single-use medical gloves have become increasingly difficult and costly to come by during the health crisis. We have health centers calling us every day, trying to get their hands on gloves, according to Sebastian Lenobel, director of Netherlands-based Shield Scientific, which markets gloves for medical, industrial, and laboratory applications. Malaysian manufacturer Top Glove, which describes itself as the world's biggest producer of rubber gloves, said it is seeing orders for 11 to 12 billion a month, compared with 4.5 billion prior to the pandemic. And as a result, customers must now wait nearly 600 days for their orders to be filled, compared with a normal delivery of 30 to 40 days, according to Chief Executive Lim Wee Chai. Chinese tech giant Tencent said it was opening a new Singapore office to serve as a Southeast Asian hub as the firm reels from the setbacks in the U.S. and India. The firm is the latest Chinese tech lender to expand in the region of 650 million, with a rapidly growing middle class and using the city-state as a base. Tencent announced the new office in a statement and said it was expanding its business presence in Singapore to support our growing business in Southeast Asia and beyond. The company, which already has offices in Malaysia, Thailand, and Indonesia, said it was recruiting for various positions. Bloomberg News, citing anonymous sources, reported the company's plans for establishing a regional hub in Singapore had been accelerated by geopolitical tensions. In the U.S., President Trump has announced a ban from mid-September on Tencent social media platform WeChat, as well as TikTok, which is owned by Chinese tech giant ByteDance. India has banned scores of Chinese apps, including Tencent's hit games, PUBG Mobile, and Arena of Valor, after troops engaged in a series of clashes at the neighbors' disputed Himalayan border. Other firms looking to bolster their presence in Singapore include ByteDance, which plans to spend billions of dollars to expand its presence there, while Alibaba is in talks to invest in Singapore-based ride-hailing firm Grab. Now, many international companies have chosen to base their regional headquarters in Singapore, and observers believe instability in longtime rival Hong Kong could give it a boost in attracting firms. Leaders in Singapore, which is majority ethnic Chinese, have been careful to maintain good ties with both the U.S. and China. More research is needed into factors that increase the risk of severe COVID-19 disease among children and adolescents. That is according to the head of the UN World Health Organization, adding that while children may have largely been spared many of the most severe effects, they have suffered in other ways. Joining the heads of the UN Children's Fund, UNICEF, and the UN Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, or UNESCO, at a press conference on Tuesday, WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus outlined that since the start of the pandemic, understanding its effect on children has been a priority.
Today, almost 9 months since the coronavirus outbreak started, 872 million students, or half the world's student population, in 51 countries are still unable to head back to their classrooms. Millions of these children were fortunate enough to learn remotely, online, through radio, through television, broadcasts, or through the internet. However, UNICEF data shows that for at least 463 million children whose schools closed during COVID-19, there was no such thing as remote learning. At least 1/3 of the world's school children were unable to access remote learning when COVID-19 shuttered their schools, including because of lack of internet access, computers, or mobile devices. The sheer number of children whose education was completely disrupted for months on end is nothing short of a global education emergency.
Given the devastating consequences on children, youth, and our societies as a whole, the decision to close schools should be a last resort, temporary, and only at a local level in areas with intense transmission. During school closures, continuity of education should be guaranteed through distance learning. The time during which schools are closed should be used to put in place measures to prevent and respond to transmission when schools reopen. Keeping children safe and at school is not a job for schools alone, or governments alone, or families alone. It's a job for all of us working together.
We have to sustain pressure on this virus. We have to reduce transmission at community level in order to lower the risk to those older and vulnerable people, and to maintain an environment in which our children can continue to attend school. The only way to do that is that the adults separate themselves enough to drive transmission downwards. So what is more important, are children back at school or the nightclubs and the bars open? And I think these are decisions that we have to make in coming into the winter months. These are trade-offs. There are no easy answers, and it would be very easy to sit here with Dr. Tedros and say you can do this and this and this and this. Unfortunately, sometimes when you do this, you can't do the other thing. You have to make those decisions. So I do think there's a time for decision-making coming as the season grows into the winter months for many, many countries. And there are no correct answers, and I think the risk management approach is the only way to go.
Henrietta Fore, UNICEF Executive Director, called on governments to prioritize reopening schools when restrictions are lifted and to focus on all the things that children need: learning, protection, and physical and mental health, and ensure the best interest of every child is put first. And when governments decide to keep schools closed, they must scale up remote learning opportunities for all children, especially the most marginalized. She also stressed, quote, find innovative ways, including online, TV, and radio, to keep children learning no matter what, unquote. ASEAN in Focus will be right back.
Ngayong Sabado sa Tagisan ng Galing.
Grabe, sa pool kami.
At least, good vibes, diritan at boses na pangmalakasan ang mangingibabaw ngayong Sabado. Kaya naman, tutok na sa Tagisan ng Galing Part 2 Singing Edition.
Tagisan ng Galing Part 2 is co-presented by Cooper, an expert in air conditioning and electromechanical. Also engaged in structural, electrical, fire protection, plumbing, and sanitary services. Cooper, your ultimate MEPS and air conditioning solutions. Unlad Incorporated International, fight against global poverty. Canrib Corporation, your ventilation and air conditioning specialist. Our sponsors, BDO, we find ways. JRC Industrial Sales, RS Square Variables provider in Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. RJK Services Manpower Agency Corporation, Robis Builders, Villa Cáceres, Chris Rack Enterprises, Victory Carpentry, DOP Asiatic Pest Control Services, and AUP Aspire for the Future. In partnership with New Era University ETAP, Expanded Tertiary Education, Equivalency and Accreditation Program. Embrace Cafe, we embrace differently abled persons.
Pagkakaalam ko po, kahit kailan, hindi po lumabog ang araw. Ang mundo po ang tumatalikod sa araw, kaya po dumidilim.
Napakaganda ng pelikula, napakagaling ng director.
I highly recommend po yung pelikula, panoorin niyo po.
Panoorin niyo po ito kasi for sure gagaan niyo po.
Opening natin, successful siya. Hopefully, magtuloy-tuloy itong Make It Real. Taon-taon makapag-produce tayo ng mga bagong filmmakers na makakatulong natin sa mga susunod ng project ng EBC Films.
Let's make it real!
Sa lahat, nagpapasalamat po ako sa ating Panginoong Diyos.
Alam po namin merong uuwing panalo pero wala pong uuwing talo.
Half of ASEAN's population live in urban areas, and an additional 70 million people are forecast to live in ASEAN cities by 2025. Rapid urbanization has brought challenges such as floods, traffic congestions, and waste problems. One of the regional efforts related to ASEAN connectivity is helping cities through ASEAN Sustainable Urbanization Strategy and its ASEAN Cities Network. Take a look.
in Vietnam are facing with many challenges in realizing the importance of sustainable urbanization in the future economic growth of the country. Now Vietnamese government set up the urban development strategy. Now Vietnamese government set up the new urban development strategy with the strategic objective of sustainable development, and ASUS so very important as as the guidance, as the reference for us in setting up targets, solution, and priority for sustainable development in Vietnam.
International tourist arrivals plunged 93% in June when compared to 2019, with the latest data from the World Tourism Organization showing the severe impact COVID-19 has had on the sector. According to the new issue of the World Tourism Barometer from the United Nations Specialized Agency, international tourist arrivals dropped by 65% during the first half of the year. This represents an unprecedented decrease as countries around the world closed their borders and introduced travel restrictions in response to the pandemic. Let's listen in.
And our friends in Madrid at the World Tourism Organization said today that international tourist arrivals dropped 65% during the first half of this year. This represents an unprecedented decrease as countries around the world close their borders and introduce travel restrictions in response to the pandemic. According to the UNWTO, the massive drop in international travel translates into a loss of 440 million international arrivals, or about $460 billion in export revenues from international tourism. They've also noted over the recent weeks a growing number of destinations have started to open up again for international tourists. As of early September, 53% of destinations had eased travel restrictions, but many governments remain cautious.
Despite the gradual reopening of many destinations since the second half of May, the anticipated improvement in international tourism numbers during the peak summer season in the Northern Hemisphere did not materialize. Europe was the second hardest hit of all global regions, with a 66% decline in tourist arrivals in the first half of 2020. The Americas, 55%, Africa and the Middle East, both 57%, also suffered. However, Asia and the Pacific, the first region to feel the impact of COVID-19 on tourism, was the hardest hit, with a 72% fall in tourists for the 6-month period. ASEAN leaders have established transport system to allow for freer trade in the ASEAN Economic Community. Now, this plan is called the ASEAN Transit System, or ACTS. Let's watch this.
ASEAN, a big expanding market. ASEAN and the EU share common objectives for economic integration and free trade. The ASEAN Economic Community is a reality, driving forwards a single market and a production base, and connecting a highly competitive region, fully integrated with the global economy. ASEAN acts as a focus for the free movement of goods, services, and investments. Together, the 10 member states generated $3 trillion in 2018, making ASEAN the 5th largest economy in the world. With the highest potential growth globally, ASEAN is set to be the world's 4th largest economy by 2050. The ASEAN Customs Transit System, or ACTS, creates a trade facilitation platform for the free movement of goods in the region. Developed jointly by ASEAN and the European Union, ACTS removes the need for multiple customs declarations at borders. ACTS requires only one electronic declaration, one guarantee, and one truck for the entire journey. This means faster, more reliable on-time deliveries and lower transport costs, backed by state-of-the-art tracking and monitoring capabilities. ACTS ensures the safety and security of society, protecting public revenues and protecting public values. Regional integration and sustainable growth are values shared by ASEAN and the European Union. Driving towards the ASEAN Community Vision 2025, ACTS will play a key role in building the regional economy, taking the single market to the next level.
Now, with millions around the world stuck at home due to the pandemic, plain cafes in Thailand are offering customers the chance to pretend they are in the sky. And the idea seems to have taken off. Take a look.
Don't เหมือนได้ไปเที่ยวได้มานั่งได้แบบว่าเหมือนมากับครอบครัวมากับแฟนมากับญาติพี่น้องอะไรอย่างเงี้ยค่ะก็ทำให้เหมือนแบบได้ไปเที่ยวในสถานที่อีกสถานที่หนึ่ง
เพราะปกติเป็นคนเดินทางท่องเที่ยวเยอะอยู่แล้วแต่พอถูกบังคับให้อยู่บ้านเนี่ยหรือว่าสายการบินเนี่ยมันยังไม่สามารถบินได้เนี่ยทำให้เราค่อนข้างห่อเดี่ยวเนาะแต่การที่เรามีบรรยากาศในการทานข้าวแบบเครื่องบินบ้างก็ทำให้ผ่อนคลายความคิดถึงตรงนั้นไปถามพร้อมไหมคะพร้อมมาเลยค่ะ
And that is the latest news in the Southeast Asian nations. Stay updated about the ASEAN region. We'll see you back next week. Have a great weekend. I'm Alma Angeles, and we live in interesting times.
Established 1975, rising in the list of top-performing universities in the country, a pioneer in inclusive education